The granite headstone catches the first light of dawn like a mirror, reflecting 27 years of morning visits back at Marcus Brennan. He stands motionless beside the black Mercedes, keys still warm in his palm, watching shadows retreat from the corners of Riverside Cemetery. October 15th. Every year the same ritual. Every year the same crushing weight in his chest that no amount of money can lift. The rose in his hand trembles slightly, not from the autumn wind cutting across the Hudson Valley, but from the tremor that's lived in his fingers since the phone call that changed everything. Red like the dress Sophie wore to her last birthday party. Red like the lipstick she borrowed from her mother without asking. Red like the blood they couldn't wash from the twisted metal of her car. Marcus adjusts his black wool coat and begins the familiar walk down the winding path. Riverside Cemetery spreads before him like a city of the dead, its rolling hills dotted with monuments ranging from simple granite markers to elaborate mausoleums that rival the mansions of the living. He chose this place because Sophie always loved hills, used to race her bicycle down every slope she could find, hair streaming behind her like a banner of rebellion against his careful, controlled world. At 62, Marcus Brennan owns half of Manhattan's skyline. His name appears on Forbes covers and charity gala invitations with equal frequency. The business magazines call him the Steel King of the Northeast, though he's never touched a beam with his own hands. His penthouse sits 80 floors above the city, insulated from noise, weather, and the kind of chaos that ordinary people call life. But here, walking between the headstones as mist rises from the grass, he feels as small and lost as any man who's ever buried a child. Sophie Elizabeth Brennan, March 3, 1997 to October 15, 2022. 25 years wasn't nearly enough time to love his daughter the way she deserved. 25 years of missed recitals, postponed vacations, and phone calls that started with, "Daddy, are you coming?" and ended with, "Maybe next time, sweetheart." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The path curves around a cluster of ancient oak trees, their branches now mostly bare, reaching toward the gray sky like arthritic fingers. Marcus has walked this route so many times he could navigate it blind, but today something's different. Today there's a sound drifting through the morning stillness, low, broken sobs that seem to echo from the very ground itself. He slows his pace, confused. This early hour belongs to him and his grief alone. The groundskeepers don't start work until 8, and most visitors avoid the dawn hours when sorrow feels too heavy for company. Marcus rounds the final bend, Sophie's grave coming into view beneath the spreading branches of the elm tree he planted the year after she died. What he sees stops him cold. A man kneels beside Sophie's headstone, his shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that comes from somewhere deeper than tears. He's young, maybe 35, wearing faded blue work clothes and scuffed brown boots. His dark hair is unruly, as if he's run his hands through it repeatedly, and his face is buried in his palms. The raw pain radiating from his hunched form is so intense, Marcus feels it in his own chest, like an echo. But it's not the crying man who steals Marcus's breath. It's the little girl sitting cross-legged beside him. She can't be more than 6 or 7, small and delicate with golden brown hair that catches the morning light. She wears a purple jacket that's seen better days and shoes that look like hand-me-downs. In her lap sits a worn teddy bear, and she's carefully arranging small white stones in a perfect circle around Sophie's headstone. Her concentration absolute. Her movements are gentle, reverent, as if she's performed this ritual many times before. When she looks up at Marcus, the world tilts. Those eyes. Dear God, those eyes. They're Sophie's eyes exactly, the same deep green with flecks of gold, the same slight upward tilt at the outer corners, the same way of looking at the world like it holds secrets she's determined to discover. Marcus has stared at those eyes in 1,000 photographs, painted portraits and haunting dreams. He knows every shade, every expression, every way they catch the light. The rose slips from his numb fingers and falls onto the wet grass. "Excuse me," Marcus manages, his voice hoarse with shock. This is my daughter's grave." The man startles and looks up, revealing a face marked by exhaustion and tears. His eyes are rimmed red, and there's a hollow look about him that Marcus recognizes, the expression of someone who's been carrying grief far too long. "Oh, God, I'm sorry," the man says, scrambling to his feet. "I'm Danny Rodriguez. This is Emma." He places a protective hand on the little girl's shoulder. "We didn't mean to. Why are you here?" Marcus's question comes out sharper than he intends. His heart is hammering against his ribs, and he can't stop staring at the child. It's impossible. Those eyes are impossible. "Why are you crying at my daughter's grave?" Danny wipes his face with the back of his sleeve, glancing down at Emma before answering. "Because she's Sophie's daughter." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggers backward, gripping the nearest headstone for support. The world spins, blurs, threatens to disappear entirely. "What did you say?" "Emma is Sophie's little girl," Danny repeats, his voice stronger now but filled with a pain that makes Marcus's chest ache. "And mine. I was Sophie's boyfriend, her fiancé, actually. We were planning to get married." Marcus stares at the little girl, at Emma, and watches his entire understanding of his daughter's life crumble like a house of cards. Sophie had a child. Sophie was engaged. Sophie had been building a future with this man, this stranger whose worn clothes and calloused hands scream working class in a way that would have horrified Marcus if he'd known. But he hadn't known. He'd known nothing. "That's impossible," Marcus whispers. "Sophie would have told me. She would have—" "She tried to," Danny says quietly. "She called you so many times, sent letters, but you were always traveling, always in meetings. She stopped trying after Emma was born, said you'd made your priorities clear." The accusation hangs between them like a blade. Marcus wants to deny it, to rage against the suggestion that he'd chosen business over his daughter, but the truth sits in his throat, like broken glass. How many calls had he sent to voicemail? How many times had he promised to call her back later, then forgotten in the whirlwind of deals and acquisitions? "Hello," Emma says softly, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. She's standing now, looking up at Marcus with those impossible familiar eyes. "Are you sad?" "Daddy says people come here when they're sad." Marcus drops to his knees without caring about his expensive coat or the damp ground. At eye level, the resemblance is even more devastating. Emma has Sophie's nose, the same stubborn chin, the same way of tilting her head when she's curious. But there's something else there too, a warmth and directness that Sophie only showed in rare, unguarded moments. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus manages, his voice breaking. "I'm very sad. Are you sad too?" Emma considers this seriously, her small hand still clutching the teddy bear. "Sometimes when I miss Mama, but Daddy says Mama is watching us from heaven, and that makes me happy sad." Marcus looks up at Danny, questions burning in his throat. "The accident—" "2 years ago," Danny says, his own voice thick. "Drunk driver ran a red light. Sophie was coming home from Emma's dance recital." He pauses, struggling with the words. "She died instantly. Emma was with her babysitter. 2 years. Sophie has been gone for 2 years, and Marcus never knew she'd left behind a child, his granddaughter. This beautiful little girl with his daughter's eyes and a stranger's last name has been growing up without him, mourning a mother Marcus had been too busy to truly know. "Why didn't anyone call me?" Marcus asks desperately. "When Sophie died, why didn't—" "I tried," Danny says, and now there's steel beneath his exhaustion. "Called your office dozens of times. Your assistants said you were unavailable. I even showed up at your building once, but security wouldn't let me pass the lobby." Marcus closes his eyes, remembering. 2 years ago had been the Singapore expansion, the biggest deal of his career. He'd spent 6 months flying between continents, sleeping in corporate apartments, living off coffee and adrenaline. His assistants had standing orders to screen calls, to protect his time from anything that wasn't directly related to business, including apparently the death of his daughter and the existence of his granddaughter. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispers, though the words feel pathetically inadequate. "I'm so sorry." Emma steps closer, studying his face with a child's uncomplicated curiosity. "You have sad eyes like Daddy," she observes, "but different sad, old sad." The simple accuracy of her words breaks something loose in Marcus's chest. He's carried this grief alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone see it, acknowledge it. "Yes," he says softly, "very old sad." "Would you like to help us with the stones?" Emma asks, holding out a small white pebble. "Daddy and I bring them every week. We make circles so Mama knows we remember her." Marcus takes the stone, its weight nothing compared to the magnitude of what Emma is offering. Inclusion in their ritual, acceptance into their small circle of remembrance. His hands shake as he places it carefully in the growing ring around Sophie's headstone. "What was she like?" he asks Danny, desperate for details, for pieces of the daughter he'd lost long before the accident. "Sophie, I mean. What was she like when you knew her?" Danny's face softens, and for the first time, Marcus sees beyond the grief to the love that lives underneath. She was sunshine," Danny says simply. "Even on her worst days, she found something to laugh about. She painted, did you know that? Watercolors mostly, flowers and birds and Emma, always Emma." Marcus didn't know. He'd bought Sophie everything. The best schools, the finest clothes, a trust fund that would have set her up for life. But he'd never bothered to learn what made her happy. "She worked at the community center," Danny continues, his voice growing stronger as he remembers. "Teaching art classes to kids who couldn't afford private lessons. That's where we met. I was fixing the broken easels and she was getting frustrated because the paint kept running. She had this way of biting her lip when she was concentrating." Marcus can picture it perfectly. Sophie at 7, 8, 9, always biting her lip when she worked on school projects he never had time to see. "Tell me about Emma," Marcus says, looking at his granddaughter as she carefully selects another stone. "What is she like? What's she afraid of? What makes her laugh?" Danny follows his gaze, and his entire expression transforms. "She loves stories," he says. "I read to her every night. We're working through The Secret Garden right now, and she's obsessed with butterflies. Knows all their names, can spot a monarch from 50 yards away. She's starting kindergarten this year, and she's terrified of the other kids not liking her, but excited about learning to read chapter books. Each detail is a gift Marcus doesn't deserve, a glimpse into a life he should have been part of from the beginning." He watches Emma arrange her stones with the same methodical precision Sophie used to apply when organizing her dollhouse furniture, and feels 25 years of missed moments settling on his shoulders like snow. "I have pictures," Danny says suddenly, pulling out a battered phone. "Of Sophie, of Emma, if you'd like to see them." Marcus nods, not trusting his voice. Danny scrolls through the photos, and Marcus's world fills with images of his daughter truly happy for the first time in memory. Sophie laughing at a picnic, flour in her hair from baking with Emma. Sophie and Danny dancing at what looks like a wedding, both glowing with joy. Sophie holding a newborn Emma, her face radiant with an exhaustion and love Marcus had never seen before. "She talked about you," Danny says quietly, still scrolling, "especially after Emma was born. She wanted you to know your granddaughter. She wanted Emma to know her grandfather. But I never—" "You never answered your phone," Danny finishes, not unkindly but with the weight of truth. "Sophie said you'd taught her that love means showing up, even when it's inconvenient, but you never showed up for her." The words land like physical blows, each one accurate and devastating. Marcus has built an empire, acquired companies, changed skylines, but he'd never learned the simple act of being present for the people who mattered most. Emma tugs at his coat sleeve, and he looks down into those familiar, forgiving eyes. "Are you my grandpa?" she asks with the directness only children possess. Marcus looks at Danny, who nods almost imperceptibly. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your mama's daddy." Emma considers this information seriously. Daddy says mama's daddy lives in a castle in the sky. Do you really live in a castle? Despite everything, Marcus finds himself smiling. "Something like that. Would you like to see it sometime?" Emma's eyes widen with excitement, but Danny's expression tightens. "I appreciate the offer, but Emma's life is here. She's got school, friends, a routine. I'm not trying to take her away," Marcus says quickly, reading the fear in Danny's face. I've missed so much already. Please don't let me miss any more." The morning sun has climbed higher now, burning through the mist and warming the air around Sophie's grave. Other visitors are beginning to arrive in the distance, but their small circle feels separate from the rest of the world. 3 people connected by love for the same extraordinary woman, navigating the complicated geography of loss and hope. "She has your stubborn streak," Danny says suddenly, watching Emma rearrange the stones for the 3rd time. "Sophie used to say Emma was going to change the world just by refusing to accept it the way it is." "Sophie was like that too," Marcus says. "Even as a little girl, she questioned everything, drove her mother crazy with all her whys and what-ifs. For a moment they share the weight of memory. 2 men who loved the same woman and failed her in different ways. Marcus with his absence, Danny with his inability to save her. The silence between them isn't comfortable, but it's not hostile either. It's the careful quiet of people learning to trust." Emma stands and brushes dirt from her knees, looking satisfied with her stone arrangement. "Mama," she says to the headstone as naturally as if Sophie were standing there, "this is Grandpa. He's really tall and he smells like coffee. I think you'd like him." Marcus feels tears on his face and doesn't bother to wipe them away. In one simple introduction, Emma has done what months of therapy and years of self-recrimination couldn't. She's given him permission to be part of something good again. "We should probably go," Danny says, checking an old digital watch. "I've got work in an hour and Emma needs breakfast." "What do you do?" Marcus asks, though he's already cataloging Danny's appearance. The stained work clothes, the tools clipped to his belt, the truck parked by the cemetery gates. "Maintenance at the elementary school," Danny says with quiet pride. "Fixing boilers, unclogging sinks, whatever needs doing. It's steady work and the hours let me be home when Emma gets out of class." Marcus nods, filed away how Danny's face changes when he talks about being there for Emma, the same way Sophie's used to light up when she talked about her art classes or volunteer work. These are people who understand that showing up matters more than showing off. "Could I—" Marcus clears his throat, trying to find words for a request he's never made before. "Could I maybe call you sometime? Take you and Emma to lunch?" I know I have no right to ask, but you don't, Danny agrees bluntly. But Emma deserves to know her grandfather, even if he's 25 years late to the party. The criticism stings because it's true. Marcus has spent decades building walls around himself. Walls of success, of busy schedules, of important meetings that were never quite as important as they seemed. Those walls had kept the world at arm's length, including his own daughter. Thank you, Marcus says simply. Danny pulls a pencil and scrap of paper from his pocket, writing down a phone number in careful block letters. I work Monday through Friday, 7 to 3. Emma has school until 3:30. Weekends are usually free, though we visit here every Saturday morning. Marcus takes the paper like it's made of gold. Contact information, a bridge back to the family he'd abandoned without meaning to. Emma runs back to Danny and takes his hand, swinging it back and forth with the boundless energy of childhood. Daddy, can Grandpa come to my recital next week? Miss Anderson says we're going to be butterflies. Danny glances at Marcus, who nods eagerly. If he wants to, Danny says carefully. But remember, grown-ups are sometimes too busy for recitals. I'm not too busy, Marcus says, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. He's built a life around being too busy, but for the first time in decades, nothing feels more important than a little girl's butterfly dance. I'll be there, front row. As they walk toward the parking area together, Emma chattering about her costume and the songs they're learning, Marcus looks back at Sophie's grave one last time. The circle of white stones glows in the morning sunlight like a promise that love persists even after loss, that families can be rebuilt even after they're broken, that sometimes the most important conversations happen in the quiet places where the living come to remember the dead. Danny loads Emma into a car seat in his old pickup truck, the careful attention he pays to every buckle and strap, speaking to years of solo parenting. Marcus watches from beside his Mercedes, the contrast between their vehicles as stark as everything else about their lives. Next Saturday, Emma calls through the truck's open window. For stones? Next Saturday, Marcus promises. And every Saturday after that, if you'll have me. The truck pulls away with a rattle and a puff of exhaust, leaving Marcus alone beside his daughter's grave. But for the first time since Sophie's death, alone doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like the space between one chapter ending and another beginning. He picks up the red rose from where he'd dropped it and places it carefully in the center of Emma's stone circle. Then he pulls out his phone and does something he hasn't done in 20 years. He cancels every meeting for the rest of the week. The screams pierce through the October night like shattered glass, high and desperate and wrong in every way that matters. Victoria Sterling's black Bentley rounds the corner of Maple Street, just as the first explosion of flames bursts through the third-floor windows of the Riverside Children's Home, painting the darkness in hellish orange and red. She slams the brakes so hard her seatbelt cuts into her chest, and for one frozen moment she can only stare in horror as 23 children's bedtime stories transform into their worst nightmare. Then she sees them, tiny figures in pajamas streaming out of the building like water through a broken dam. Some carried by staff members, others stumbling on their own, all of them screaming, crying, reaching back toward the inferno that used to be their home. The scene is chaos incarnate. Firefighters shouting orders over radio static, police cars arriving with sirens that can't compete with the roar of flames eating through century-old wood. And everywhere the terrible sound of children who don't understand why their safe place is trying to kill them. Victoria throws open her car door and steps into air thick with smoke and panic. She's been to 1,000 charity galas, written checks with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime, had her picture taken beside oversized donation checks for this very orphanage. But standing here in her $1,000 dress and diamond earrings, watching the building she helped fund turn into a death trap. Every philanthropic gesture feels like a lie she told herself about caring. A social worker stumbles past her carrying two sobbing toddlers, their faces streaked with soot and tears. "Is everyone out?" Victoria shouts over the noise. "Are all the children accounted for?" The woman's eyes are wild with terror. "We're trying to count, but the smoke alarms failed and the sprinkler system. God, there's supposed to be a sprinkler system." She keeps moving toward the cluster of emergency vehicles where other staff members are desperately taking roll call. That's when Victoria sees him. While everyone else runs away from the building, one man runs toward it. He's not wearing a firefighter's uniform or a paramedic's badge, just faded blue work clothes and steel-toed boots, the invisible uniform of someone who fixes broken things and cleans up messes. As she watches in stunned disbelief, he disappears through the orphanage's main entrance, swallowed by smoke and flame like a man diving into his own grave. "Stop!" Victoria screams, but her voice is lost in the chaos. She looks around wildly for someone in authority, someone who can call him back, but the firefighters are still setting up their equipment, and the police are focused on crowd control. The man, whoever he is, just ran into a burning building, and no one else seems to have noticed. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Without thinking, without planning, without any of the careful calculation that built her billion-dollar empire, Victoria Sterling kicks off her designer heels and runs after him. The heat hits her like a physical wall the moment she crosses the threshold. The elegant foyer she remembered from her last donation visit. Polished wood floors, walls covered in children's artwork, a reception desk where Mrs. Henderson always greeted visitors with fresh cookies, has become an alien landscape of smoke and shadow. The temperature feels like standing inside an oven, and each breath burns her lungs with superheated air that tastes of melting plastic and fear. "Hello," she shouts, her voice cracking. "Where are you?" Through the smoke, she hears something that stops her heart. A child's voice, high and terrified, calling for help from somewhere deeper in the building. Then she hears another voice, rough, urgent, completely unafraid, answering back. "I'm coming, sweetheart. Keep talking to me. Tell me your name." Victoria follows the voices through a hallway that feels like walking through hell itself. The ceiling drips with something hot and black, and her expensive dress is already ruined with soot and sweat. Her lungs feel like they're filling with ground glass, and every instinct screams at her to turn around, to get out, to let someone else be the hero. But she can't, because somewhere in this inferno is a man who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away, and a child who needs saving, and Victoria Sterling, who has spent 60 years building walls of wealth between herself and the messy, dangerous reality of other people's pain, suddenly can't live with herself if she doesn't try to help. She rounds a corner and finds them. The man kneels beside a bed in what used to be a small dormitory room, now filling rapidly with smoke. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, sits on the mattress clutching a stuffed elephant, her dark eyes wide with terror, but fixed trustingly on the stranger who came back for her. The ceiling above them groans ominously, and Victoria can see flames creeping along the walls like hungry fingers. "The stairs collapsed," the man says without turning around, somehow knowing she's there. "Windows are our only way out, but it's too high for her to jump." Victoria gets her first good look at him then. Broad shoulders, graying hair, a face marked by years of hard work and harder choices. His name tag, somehow still pinned to his smoke-stained shirt, reads, "James Maintenance." This is the janitor, the man who empties trash cans and fixes leaky faucets and becomes invisible the moment someone important walks into a room. the man who ran into a burning building to save a child. "I'll take her," Victoria says, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I'm smaller. I can fit through the window easier." James looks at her for the first time, taking in her torn designer dress, her soot-streaked face, her complete and obvious displacement in this world of real crisis. "Lady, you shouldn't be here. This place is coming down." "Neither should you," she shoots back, moving closer to the bed. "But here we are." The little girl, Sarah, according to the name card taped to her bed frame, looks between them with the solemn gravity that only children in terrible situations possess. "Are you going to save me?" she asks, in a voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," James and Victoria say at exactly the same time. For one impossible moment in a room filling with deadly smoke, two people who live in completely different worlds look at each other and see the same thing. Someone willing to risk everything for a child they've never met. James moves to the window, using a chair to smash out the remaining glass. The frame is maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall. Manageable for someone small and desperate, potentially fatal for someone who hesitates. Below them, Victoria can see firefighters positioning a rescue net, but the angle is wrong, the distance too great for a standard jump. "I'll lower her down as far as I can," James says, his voice clinical despite the chaos. "Then drop her to the net, but someone needs to go first to guide her." Victoria understands immediately. Someone needs to take the risk to show Sarah that the leap is possible, to be there to catch her if the net doesn't hold. She climbs onto the chair without hesitation. "Wait!" James grabs her arm, and for the first time she sees fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. "You don't have to do this. You're not trained for this. You could die." Victoria looks at him. This man who could have run to safety but chose to run toward danger, who could have saved himself but chose to save others, and feels something crack open in her chest. Something that's been locked away behind decades of boardroom meetings and charity galas, and the careful distance that money creates between the comfortable and the desperate. "Neither are you trained for this," she says, "but you're here anyway." James studies her face for a long moment, and whatever he sees there makes him nod once, sharp and decisive. "Okay, I'll lower you down first, then the girl. The firefighters are already positioning the net." Victoria turns to Sarah, whose enormous dark eyes hold a trust that feels both precious and terrifying. "What's your favorite thing about elephants?" Victoria asks, trying to keep her voice light despite the growing heat and smoke. "They never forget," Sarah whispers, clutching her stuffed animal tighter. "That's right," Victoria says, placing a gentle hand on the little girl's cheek. "And I promise you, I will never forget how brave you're being right now." The ceiling groans again, more urgently this time, and somewhere in the distance Victoria hears the sound of structure collapsing. They're out of time. James helps her through the window frame, his strong hands gripping her wrists as he lowers her toward the net below. For a moment, Victoria dangles in space, suspended between a burning building and a group of strangers whose job it is to catch falling people. The irony isn't lost on her. After a lifetime of never depending on anyone, she's literally hanging by the hands of a janitor she met 5 minutes ago. "Let go!" someone shouts from below. Victoria looks up one last time, meeting James's eyes through the smoke and flames. "Don't you dare leave her," she says. "Wouldn't dream of it," he replies. And then Victoria Sterling, who has spent 60 years playing it safe, lets go. The net bounces her like a trampoline, rough but functional, and suddenly she's surrounded by firefighters checking her for injuries and paramedics asking if she can breathe. But Victoria's attention stays fixed on the window above, where she can see James lifting Sarah into his arms. "Here she comes!" he shouts. The little girl appears in the window frame, still clutching her elephant, guided by hands that belong to a man who could have been anywhere else in the world, but chose to be here, in this moment, for her. Sarah falls into the net like a small, brave star, and the crowd of emergency workers erupts in cheers. But Victoria barely hears them. She's watching James in the window, preparing to make his own leap, when the ceiling of the dormitory finally gives up its fight against the flames. The room behind him explodes in a shower of sparks and burning debris. The window frame buckles, and James, the janitor who ran into a burning building to save a child, disappears into the smoke with a crash that echoes across the street like thunder. No! Victoria's scream cuts through every other sound. The sirens, the flames, the shouts of the firefighters. She tries to run back toward the building, but strong hands hold her back. In the space where heroes are born and sometimes die, the night holds its breath and waits to see if courage is enough to survive the fire that tries to consume it. The silence stretches for exactly 7 seconds. Victoria counts everyone before a figure emerges from the smoke pouring out of a first-floor window. James stumbles into the street, his hair singed, his clothes smoldering but alive and whole, and still carrying something in his arms. A second child, a little boy who must have been trapped in another room. This time Victoria doesn't wait for the paramedics. She runs to James and Sarah both, and for the first time in her carefully controlled life, she understands what it means to be part of something bigger than herself. The Riverside Children's Home burns through the night, taking with it 23 children's bedrooms, a lifetime of donated toys, and every comfortable assumption Victoria Sterling ever made about the difference between writing checks and changing lives. But in the morning, when the smoke clears and the cameras arrive, and the reporters start asking questions about heroes and disasters and the strange sight of a billionaire covered in soot standing next to a janitor who saved lives, Victoria will realize that some fires don't just destroy. Sometimes they forge things that were always meant to exist. This opening creates immediate dramatic tension with the fire, establishes the life or death stakes, and sets up the collision between Victoria, billionaire, and James, janitor, in the most heroic circumstances possible. The hook grabs readers immediately with action and suspense. The emergency room at Philadelphia General smells like disinfectant and fear, a sterile maze of curtained beds where the night's casualties wait for salvation or verdict. Victoria Sterling sits on a plastic chair that costs less than her usual lunch, still wearing the ruins of her designer dress, watching a doctor examine James Kellerman's hands under harsh, fluorescent lights that make everyone look like ghosts. Second-degree burns on the palms, the doctor murmurs, wrapping gauze around fingers that saved lives just hours ago. Some smoke inhalation, minor cuts from the glass. You're lucky. Another few minutes in there, and we'd be talking about a very different conversation. James winces as the bandages tighten, but doesn't make a sound. He hasn't made a sound about his own pain since they pulled him from the wreckage, too busy asking about Sarah and the other children, making sure everyone got out, refusing treatment until the last firefighter confirmed the building was clear. Victoria has watched him for 3 hours now, and every minute has unraveled another assumption she didn't know she was carrying. She expected him to bask in the heroism, to demand recognition, to somehow monetize his 15 minutes of fame the way everyone seems to these days. Instead, he keeps trying to slip away from the reporters camped outside, deflecting every question about his actions with a gruff, "Just did what anyone would do." But anyone wouldn't do what he did. Victoria knows this because she's seen anyone in action her whole life. People who step over homeless veterans on their way to charity galas, executives who donate millions to children's hospitals while paying their custodial staff poverty wages, socialites who pose for pictures with orphans and then complain about increased property taxes. James Kellerman ran into a burning building, not for cameras, not for money, not for recognition. He ran toward the fire because children were trapped inside, and someone needed to go get them. "Mr. Kellerman," the doctor says, finishing the bandages, "I'm prescribing pain medication and recommending you take at least a week off work. That smoke inhalation needs time to—" "Can't afford a week off," James interrupts quietly. "Bills don't stop coming because someone played hero." The words hit Victoria like a slap. While she's been sitting here marveling at his character, he's been calculating whether saving children's lives will cost him his rent money. She thinks of her penthouse apartment, empty and pristine, 80 floors above the city. She could buy his building, his entire block, with the interest that accumulates in her checking account while she sleeps. "The hospital has programs for people in your situation," the doctor says gently. "Financial assistance, payment plans." "I'll handle my own bills," James says, and there's steel beneath the exhaustion. Pride, Victoria realizes, the kind of pride that comes from a lifetime of standing on your own 2 feet, even when those feet are tired and the ground keeps shifting. Through the thin curtain dividing the treatment areas, Victoria can hear Sarah's voice, bright and animated, telling a nurse about her stuffed elephant's adventures. The little girl who was silent with terror just hours ago is now chattering away, resilient in the way only children can be. But mixed with her chatter, Victoria catches fragments of other conversations. Social workers discussing temporary placement, administrators calculating insurance costs, bureaucrats turning a tragedy into paperwork. 23 children are homeless tonight because their safe place burned down. The thought sits in Victoria's chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. She's written checks to children's charities before, posed for the photographs, felt the warm glow of philanthropic duty. But tonight, she held a terrified little girl in her arms and promised her safety. And now that little girl is going to sleep in a stranger's house because the system that was supposed to protect her failed. "Excuse me," a voice says, and Victoria looks up to see a harried-looking woman in a Red Cross vest. "Are you Victoria Sterling, the woman who helped with the rescue?" "I am." "I'm Jennifer Walsh, emergency coordinator. We're trying to place the children for tonight, but we're short on emergency foster families. Would you be willing to speak to the media about the need for temporary housing? Sometimes a high-profile endorsement helps." "No," Victoria says, surprising herself with the sharpness of her response. "I won't pose for pictures while those children sleep on cots in a gymnasium." Jennifer blinks, clearly not used to having her requests refused. "I understand your concern, but raising awareness is crucial for—" "How much?" Victoria interrupts. "I'm sorry? How much money do you need to house those children properly tonight? Not in shelters or group facilities, but in actual homes with actual families who can take care of them." Jennifer fumbles with her clipboard. "Well, the emergency placement fee is usually about $200 per child per night, but finding qualified families on such short notice—" "Done." Victoria pulls out her phone. "I'll transfer $50,000 to your emergency fund right now. Use it to pay families, rent hotel suites, hire additional staff, whatever it takes to make sure those children are safe and comfortable tonight." "Miss Sterling, that's very generous, but the bureaucratic process for emergency placements is complicated. We can't just—" "Then uncomplicate it," Victoria says, her voice carrying the authority that comes from a lifetime of making impossible things happen. "Call whoever you need to call. Pull whatever strings exist to be pulled. Those children have been through enough trauma for one night." From behind the curtain, James's voice cuts through their conversation. "You don't need to throw money at this to make yourself feel better." Victoria turns to face him, and she can see the judgment in his eyes. the assumption that she's just another rich person trying to buy her way out of uncomfortable emotions. The accusation stings because it's partly true. She does want to make the problem go away, does want to return to her safe, controlled world where other people's tragedies exist at a comfortable distance. But it's also partly false, and that's the part that matters. "You're right," she says simply. "I don't need to, but they need me to." James studies her face for a long moment, looking for something Victoria isn't sure she possesses. Whatever he sees there, it makes his expression soften slightly. "Money doesn't fix everything," he says quietly. "No," Victoria agrees, "but it fixes some things, and right now it can fix where 23 children sleep tonight." If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The curtain dividing their area pulls back, and Sarah appears, still clutching her elephant, followed by a social worker who looks like she hasn't slept in days. "Mr. James," Sarah exclaims, running to the bed where he sits. "Are your hands okay? Do they hurt?" James's entire demeanor transforms when he sees her. The wariness, the exhaustion, the defensive pride, all of it melts away, replaced by genuine warmth. "They're just fine, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Good," Sarah says seriously. "The nurse gave me crackers, and they have a TV here, and I got to ride in an ambulance. But Miss Victoria—" She turns to look at Victoria with those enormous dark eyes. "Why did you jump first?" The question catches Victoria off guard. She looks at this little girl who survived a fire and wants to understand the adult behavior she witnessed, and realizes she doesn't have a simple answer. "Because Mr. James asked me to," she says finally. "And because sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things to keep children safe." Sarah nods as if this makes perfect sense. "Like when Mommy jumped in front of the car to push me out of the way." The temperature in the small space seems to drop 10 degrees. Victoria sees James's face go pale, and the social worker's expression tightens with the look of someone who deals with too many tragic stories. "Sarah's mother died in a car accident 8 months ago," the social worker explains quietly. "She was Sarah's only family. That's how she came to Riverside." Victoria feels something crack open in her chest, not just sympathy but recognition. This little girl has already lost everything once, and tonight she's lost it again. The only home she's known since her mother's death has literally gone up in smoke, and tomorrow she'll wake up in another unfamiliar place with another set of strangers trying to take care of her. "Where will she go tonight?" Victoria asks. "We're working on placement," the social worker says with practiced vagueness. "There's a group home in Camden that might have space." "No." The word comes out of Victoria's mouth before she's consciously made the decision. "She'll come home with me." Everyone stares at her, James with surprise, the social worker with bureaucratic alarm, Sarah with curious hope. "Miss Sterling," the social worker says carefully, "emergency placement requires background checks, home studies, approval from the state. You can't just—" "Then do the checks," Victoria says. "Tonight, I'll pay for expedited processing, additional staff, whatever it takes. Run my fingerprints, call my references, search my property records. I have a penthouse apartment with more bedrooms than I know what to do with, a household staff that can help with childcare, and resources to provide for anything she needs." "You don't know anything about taking care of children," James says bluntly. He's right, of course. Victoria has never changed a diaper, never attended a parent-teacher conference, never had to comfort a child through a nightmare. Her life has been deliberately childless, focused on empire building and profit margins and the kind of strategic thinking that doesn't include bedtime stories or school lunches. But looking at Sarah, this brave little girl who jumped from a burning building because a stranger promised to catch her, Victoria feels something she's never experienced before. The absolute certainty that she would rather fail at something important than succeed at something meaningless. "You're right," she admits. "I don't know anything about children, but I know about keeping promises, and I promised her I'd never forget how brave she was tonight." Sarah tugs at Victoria's sleeve. "Would I have my own room, with windows?" The question breaks Victoria's heart. Such a small thing, a room with windows, but apparently something this little girl hasn't taken for granted. "You'd have the biggest room in the apartment," Victoria promises, "with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the whole city. You could see for miles." "Could Elephant come too?" Sarah asks, holding up her stuffed animal. "Elephant would be the guest of honor." James watches this exchange with an expression Victoria can't read, part skepticism, part something that might be hope. "And what happens in a week when the novelty wears off?" he asks. "When she wakes up crying in the middle of the night because she misses her mom, or when she's scared of the dark, or when taking care of a traumatized kid starts interfering with your real life?" It's a fair question, and Victoria doesn't have a perfect answer. She doesn't know what she'll do when Sarah has nightmares, doesn't know how to explain death and loss to a 5-year-old, doesn't know anything about the daily reality of raising a child. But she knows something else, something that feels more important than expertise. "Then I'll figure it out," Victoria says simply, "because that's what you do for people you care about. You figure it out." For the first time since the fire, James smiles, not the polite, guarded expression he's worn with everyone else, but something genuine and warm. "That's probably the most honest thing anyone's said to me all night." The social worker looks between them, clearly torn between procedure and pragmatism. "Miss Sterling, even with expedited processing, temporary guardianship takes time." "How much time?" Victoria asks, already pulling out her phone again. "Normally several weeks, but in emergency situations, if we can verify housing, background, and financial stability." "Give me 12 hours, Victoria says. "By morning you'll have everything you need. Background checks, financial statements, references from everyone I've ever done business with. I'll hire the best family law attorney in the city to handle the paperwork." "You can't just buy a child," James says quietly. "I'm not buying her," Victoria replies, looking directly at him. "I'm choosing her. The way you chose to run into that building instead of away from it. Sometimes the choice is more important than the qualifications." Sarah, who has been listening to this adult conversation with the serious attention children bring to discussions about their future, suddenly speaks up. "Mr. James, are you coming too?" The question hangs in the air like smoke. Victoria realizes she hasn't thought about James in her impulsive plan. She's been so focused on Sarah's immediate needs that she forgot about the man who saved her life, who has his own injuries and his own story and his own life to return to. "Oh, sweetheart," James says gently, "I have my own home, my own job. I can't just—" "But you saved me," Sarah says with the logic only children possess. "Don't savers and savies stay together?" Victoria looks at James, this man who risked his life for strangers, who deflects praise like it's something dangerous, who clearly cares more about Sarah's well-being than his own recognition. She thinks about her enormous apartment designed for entertaining business associates and impressing potential investors, 90% of which she never uses. She thinks about her household staff, professional and efficient, but never quite warm. She thinks about all the space in her life that she's never known how to fill. "Sarah's right," Victoria says. "We should stay together at least until—" She trails off, realizing she doesn't know what comes next. Until the orphanage is rebuilt? Until Sarah finds a permanent family? until this strange night becomes just a memory. Miss Sterling, James says carefully, you don't owe me anything. I didn't do what I did for rewards or... I know that, Victoria interrupts. That's exactly why I'm asking. You didn't save her for recognition, and I'm not offering this for recognition either. I'm offering it because Sarah's right. People who save each other should look out for each other. James glances around the sterile hospital room, at the social worker taking notes on her clipboard, at Sarah swinging her legs from the examination table, like this is all a grand adventure. His expression is unreadable, but Victoria can see him thinking, weighing options, calculating costs and benefits, the way people do when they're used to having more needs than resources. I have a job, he says finally. Maintenance at the elementary school. Can't just abandon that. The school district will understand, Victoria says. I can make sure of that. And if they don't... She shrugs. I know people on the school board. I don't want charity, James says firmly. Good, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering partnership. You know how to take care of people, and I know how to solve logistical problems. Sarah needs both right now. The social worker clears her throat. If you're serious about this arrangement, we'll need to evaluate both of you as potential caregivers. Background checks, home visits, interviews. Schedule them, Victoria says without hesitation. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you need. We'll be ready. She pulls out her phone and starts making calls. First to her attorney, then to her building manager, then to her housekeeper. Each conversation is brief and efficient. Prepare the guest rooms, stock the kitchen with child-appropriate food, install safety locks on anything that might be dangerous to a curious 5-year-old. As she talks, Victoria watches James watching Sarah. The little girl has discovered that the examination table can spin, and she's turning in slow circles while making her stuffed elephant fly around her head. James's expression is soft, protective, like someone who understands exactly how precious and fragile childhood joy can be. You don't have to do this, he says quietly when Victoria finishes her calls. Neither did you, she points out, but you did it anyway. James considers this. Running into a burning building is different from taking responsibility for a child's whole life. Is it? Victoria asks. Both require you to put someone else's safety ahead of your own comfort. Both mean accepting that you might fail, but deciding that the risk is worth it. Through the hospital's windows, Victoria can see dawn creeping across Philadelphia's skyline. The city is waking up to news of the fire, to headlines about heroes and tragedy and the billionaire who followed a janitor into danger. Soon there will be interviews and photo opportunities and people wanting to turn this into a story about her generosity or James's courage. But right now, in this quiet moment before the world intrudes, it's just 3 people who survived something terrible together and are trying to figure out how to take care of each other afterward. Okay, James says finally, so quietly Victoria almost misses it. Okay, I'll help. But not as charity case or employee, as Sarah's family. Because that's what we are now, whether it makes sense or not. Sarah stops spinning and looks at them both with an expression of pure satisfaction, as if she's been waiting for the adults to catch up to what she already understood. Good, she says simply. Now can we go home? Elephant is tired. Victoria looks at this little girl, orphaned twice, rescued from fire, and still ready to trust strangers who promise to take care of her, and feels something shift permanently in her chest. Home. Such a simple word for such a complicated concept, but maybe that's what they're going to try to build together, a home for people who have lost theirs, held together not by blood or law, but by the choice to show up for each other when it matters. Yes, Victoria says, standing up and offering Sarah her hand. Let's go home. As they walk through the hospital corridors together, the billionaire, the janitor, and the little girl who brought them together, Victoria realizes that everything she thought she knew about family, about responsibility, about what it means to save someone's life, has just gone up in smoke. And from those ashes, something entirely new is about to begin. The paperwork takes 18 hours and costs more than most people's annual salary, but Victoria Sterling has never met a bureaucratic problem that couldn't be solved with the right combination of money, lawyers, and sheer determination. By 6 o'clock the following evening, she has temporary emergency guardianship of Sarah Martinez, a background check clean enough to qualify her for government security clearance, and a penthouse apartment that's been transformed from a showcase of wealth into something that might actually qualify as a home. James Kellerman has spent those same 18 hours fielding calls from reporters, deflecting marriage proposals from strangers who saw him on the news, and trying to wrap his head around the fact that his life has completely changed because he made the same choice any decent person would make: to help someone who needed help. At least, that's what he keeps telling himself. Any decent person would have run into that building. Any decent person would have gone back for the children. The fact that most people didn't, that most people stood on the sidewalk recording videos with their phones while children screamed for help, is something James doesn't want to think about too closely. But Victoria Sterling isn't most people, and that's becoming more obvious by the hour. She meets them at the hospital with a car service, not her usual chauffeur-driven Bentley, but a regular sedan with car seats properly installed and a driver who knows the route to the nearest toy store. While they shop for emergency supplies, Victoria watches James navigate the aisles with the confidence of someone who's helped raise children before. Nieces and nephews, he explains when she asks. My sister has 4 kids. I used to watch them when money got tight. He guides them through the necessities with practiced efficiency: pajamas in Sarah's size, children's books, a nightlight shaped like a butterfly, crayons and coloring books, a lunchbox decorated with cartoon elephants. Victoria finds herself taking mental notes, cataloging all the things she's never had to think about. Children need different soap than adults. They require special plates that won't break when dropped. They have opinions about the color and texture of their clothes, and those opinions matter more than fashion or cost. Sarah herself treats the shopping trip like an adventure, chattering non-stop about her preferences and asking detailed questions about Victoria's apartment. Does it have a bathtub? Yes. Are there books? Thousands. Can she see the whole city from the windows? On a clear day, you can see all the way to New Jersey. Will you read me stories? Sarah asks as they stand in the book section, her arms full of picture books featuring brave animals and magical adventures. Every night, Victoria promises, then realizes she's never read a children's story out loud in her life. James will help me with the voices. James raises an eyebrow but doesn't contradict her. I do a pretty good dragon, he admits. By the time they reach Victoria's building, the October sun is setting behind the Philadelphia skyline, painting the city in shades of gold and orange that remind Victoria uncomfortably of the fire. But Sarah, pressed against the car window, pointing excitedly at the lights beginning to twinkle in office building windows, seems to have left the trauma of the previous night behind with the resilience that only children possess. The doorman greets them with professional courtesy, but Victoria catches him doing a double take at James's work clothes and Sarah's second-hand jacket. She makes a mental note to have a conversation with building management about assumptions and judgments. Her neighbors might be curious about her unexpected house guests, but their curiosity will remain polite or they'll find their lease renewal applications mysteriously delayed. The elevator ride to the 80th floor is quiet, except for Sarah counting the numbers as they light up on the display. When the doors open directly into Victoria's foyer, the little girl's eyes go wide. It's like a castle, she breathes. Victoria looks at her home through Sarah's eyes and feels a flush of embarrassment. The marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the abstract art worth more than most people's houses. It's all designed to impress, to intimidate, to establish her status in a world where power is measured in square footage and auction house receipts. It's beautiful and cold and completely inappropriate for a child who just lost everything she owned. But James is studying the space with a different kind of attention, noting the sharp corners on glass tables, the lack of safety gates near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the white furniture that will show every fingerprint and spill. "We'll need to make some adjustments," he says diplomatically. Over the next 3 hours, they transform Victoria's showcase apartment into something resembling a place where a child might actually live. James moves the glass coffee table into storage and rearranges furniture to create clear sightlines and soft surfaces. Victoria's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, arrives with groceries and proceeds to stock the kitchen with foods Sarah might actually eat. Apple slices and string cheese and pasta shapes that look like animals. Sarah herself supervises the preparation of her new bedroom with the seriousness of a project manager. The guest room overlooking the city is bigger than the entire dormitory she shared at the orphanage, and she tests every feature thoroughly. The adjustable reading light, the window seat with built-in storage, the bathroom with a step stool so she can reach the sink. "Where will Mr. James sleep?" she asks, as Victoria helps her arrange her new stuffed animals on the bed. It's a question Victoria has been avoiding. The guest room across the hall is available, but assuming James will stay the night feels presumptuous. Assuming he won't feels disappointing in a way she doesn't want to examine too closely. "Mr. James has his own apartment," Victoria says carefully. "He'll probably want to go home tonight." Sarah's face falls. "But what if I have bad dreams? What if I get scared and want to talk to someone who was in the fire with me?" The question hits Victoria like a punch to the chest. She's been so focused on providing material comfort, safety, shelter, food, toys, that she's forgotten about emotional needs. Sarah doesn't just need a place to sleep. She needs to feel connected to people who understand what she's been through. From the doorway, James clears his throat. "I could stay tonight," he offers, "on the couch, just until Sarah gets settled." Victoria feels something loosen in her chest, relief and gratitude, and something warmer that she's not ready to name. "The guest room is more comfortable than the couch," she says. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. You're helping. There's a difference." That night, after Sarah has been bathed and fed and read 3 stories about brave elephants who save their friends, Victoria sits in her study with James, sharing a bottle of wine and trying to process what they've gotten themselves into. "She seems to be doing well," James observes, watching Sarah through the doorway as she arranges her stuffed animals in a very specific pattern on her bed. "For now," Victoria agrees. "But what about tomorrow? Next week? What happens when she asks about her mother or wants to go back to Riverside or realizes that nothing about this situation is normal?" James takes a sip of wine. Good wine, Victoria notices, though he doesn't comment on the label or vintage the way her usual dinner guests would. "Normal's overrated," he says. Sarah's had 2 normal situations in her life, living with her mother and living at the orphanage. Both of them ended in tragedy. Maybe abnormal is exactly what she needs. Victoria considers this. "You don't think we're in over our heads?" "I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be," James says simply. "Sometimes you don't choose to become a family. Sometimes you just wake up one day and realize that's what you already are." Through the study windows, Philadelphia spreads out below them like a circuit board, millions of lights marking millions of lives, most of them intersecting only briefly, accidentally, forgettably. But tonight, in this improbable space where a billionaire and a janitor are learning to take care of a little girl, who belongs to neither of them and both of them. Victoria feels the weight of connection, real connection, built not on social obligation or business advantage, but on the simple recognition that some responsibilities choose you rather than the other way around. "James," she says quietly, "tomorrow there are going to be reporters, interviews, people wanting to turn this into a story about heroism or charity or whatever narrative sells newspapers. But I want you to know, this isn't a publicity stunt for me. This isn't about my image or my company or making myself look good. This is about Sarah." James meets her eyes, and for the first time since the fire, his expression is completely open, free of the wariness and skepticism he's carried like armor. "I know," he says. "I wouldn't be here if I thought otherwise." From the bedroom comes Sarah's voice, soft and drowsy. "Miss Victoria, Mr. James, are you still there?" They both move toward the bedroom, where Sarah lies surrounded by her new stuffed animals but clutching the original elephant she carried out of the fire. "We're here, sweetheart," Victoria says, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Will you be here tomorrow too?" Sarah asks. Victoria looks at James, then back at the little girl, whose trust feels both precious and terrifying. "We'll be here as long as you need us to be," she promises. "Good," Sarah says, closing her eyes. "Elephant was worried, but I told him heroes don't just disappear. They stay and help you build new things." As Sarah drifts off to sleep, Victoria realizes that the little girl understands something about heroism that most adults miss. It's not about the dramatic moment of rescue. It's about what comes after, the daily choice to show up, to stay present, to keep building something good from the wreckage of what was lost. In the morning, Victoria Sterling will wake up to a kitchen full of breakfast smells and children's laughter, to a life that includes school drop-offs and bedtime stories and the constant background hum of another person's needs and dreams and fears. It will be messier than anything she's ever committed to, more complicated than any business deal she's ever negotiated, and more important than any success she's ever achieved. But tonight, watching James dim the lights, while Sarah sleeps peacefully in a safe bed for the first time since the fire, Victoria feels something she's never experienced in 60 years of careful planning and calculated risks. The absolute certainty that she's exactly where she belongs. 3 weeks later, Victoria Sterling discovers that building a family is harder than building an empire and infinitely more fragile. The first sign of trouble comes on a Tuesday morning, disguised as a phone call from Sarah's new school. Victoria is in her home office, reviewing quarterly reports while Sarah colors at the small desk they've installed by the window, when her phone rings with the polite but strained voice of Principal Martinez. "Miss Sterling, we need to discuss Sarah's behavior. There was an incident today during fire drill practice." Victoria's blood goes cold. "What kind of incident?" Sarah became extremely agitated when the alarm sounded. She hid under her desk and refused to come out. When the teacher tried to help her, she started screaming that she couldn't go outside because the building was burning. It took 40 minutes to calm her down. Through the phone, Victoria can hear the careful neutrality that educators use when they're trying not to blame anyone but need someone to fix a problem they can't solve. She looks at Sarah, who is drawing what appears to be a house with bright yellow flames coming out of every window, and feels her heart sink. "We'll be right there," Victoria says. The drive to Riverside Elementary is silent except for Sarah's sniffling. She sits in her car seat clutching Elephant, no longer the cheerful chatterbox who fills every moment with questions and observations. James, who had arrived at Victoria's apartment that morning to find Sarah refusing to eat breakfast, sits in the passenger seat, radiating the quiet tension of someone trying to solve a problem he doesn't fully understand. They've all been pretending the trauma was manageable, that love and safety and material comfort could somehow erase the memory of flames and smoke and terror. But trauma, Victoria is learning, doesn't follow the rules of logic or gratitude. It hides in fire drills and bedtime shadows, in the smell of toast burning or the sound of sirens in the distance. Principal Martinez greets them in her office with the weary kindness of someone who's seen too many children carry burdens too heavy for small shoulders. Sarah is a bright, sweet child, she begins, but she's clearly struggling with some significant anxiety around emergency procedures. This is the third time this month she's had a panic response to routine safety drills. "What do you recommend?" James asks, his voice tight with controlled worry. "Therapy, first and foremost. Trauma counseling specifically designed for children who've experienced fires or other disasters, and we may need to consider alternative arrangements for emergency drills, perhaps having Sarah step out of the classroom before we sound the alarms." Victoria feels something twist in her stomach. Alternative arrangements, special accommodations, the polite educational language for a child who doesn't fit the normal mold, who requires extra effort and patience and understanding. She thinks of her own childhood, boarding schools where difference was discouraged, where problems were solved by sending difficult children elsewhere, where love was conditional on convenience. "Whatever she needs," Victoria says firmly, "therapy, accommodations, anything, we'll make it work." But as they drive home with Sarah silent in the back seat, Victoria can't shake the feeling that making it work might be more complicated than writing checks and making phone calls. That night, after Sarah finally falls asleep, following 2 hours of tears and nightmares, Victoria and James sit in her study, sharing wine and the weight of responsibility neither of them was prepared for. "Maybe this was a mistake," Victoria says quietly, voicing the fear that's been growing in her chest for days. "Maybe she needs more than we can give her. Professional care, people who understand trauma, families with experience." "Stop," James interrupts, his voice sharp with something that might be anger. "Don't you dare!" Victoria looks up, startled by his tone. "Don't you dare give up on her because things got difficult," James continues. "Sarah has been abandoned by death twice, and by circumstance more times than any child should survive. She doesn't need perfect parents. She needs people who stick around when the easy part ends." "I'm not giving up," Victoria protests. "I'm trying to be realistic about what's best for—" "What's best for her is stability," James says. "What's best for her is waking up in the same bed every morning with the same people who promised to take care of her. What's best for her is not being passed along to another family because her trauma is inconvenient." The words hit like a slap, and Victoria feels her own anger rising. "I never said it was inconvenient. I said maybe she needs more help than we can provide." "She needs therapy," James agrees. "She needs patience and understanding and probably years of healing, but she also needs to know that the people she depends on won't disappear the moment things get complicated." "Like her mother disappeared," Victoria snaps, then immediately regrets it. James goes very still. "Her mother died protecting her," he says quietly. "That's not abandonment. That's sacrifice." The silence stretches between them, heavy with accusations and fears and the kind of fundamental disagreement that can shatter fragile alliances. Victoria stares into her wine glass, thinking about her own childhood, about the boarding school dormitories where she learned that love was something you earned through achievement and good behavior, something that could be withdrawn if you became too much trouble. "I'm scared," she admits finally. "I'm scared I'll fail her the way I failed at every other relationship I've ever had. I'm scared she'll keep getting worse and I won't know how to help and she'll end up more damaged because I thought money and good intentions were enough." James's expression softens. "You think I'm not scared too? You think I don't lie awake wondering if we're completely in over our heads?" Then why are you so sure we should keep trying? Because, James says simply, love isn't about being qualified. It's about showing up anyway. From down the hallway comes a sound that stops their conversation cold. Sarah screaming in her sleep. They reach her bedroom at the same time, finding her thrashing in bed, eyes closed but face contorted with terror. Fire! She cries. Fire! I can't find the door. Mama, Mama, where are you? James sits on the bed and gently touches her shoulder. Sarah, sweetheart, you're safe. You're in your room. There's no fire. But Sarah doesn't wake up. She continues to struggle against invisible flames, calling for a mother who died saving her life, reliving trauma that therapy sessions and bedtime stories can't erase. Victoria feels helpless, useless, completely out of her depth. All her money and influence and problem-solving skills mean nothing in the face of a child's night terror. She watches James hold Sarah gently but firmly, speaking in low, calm tones, waiting for the nightmare to release its grip. When Sarah finally wakes, gasping and confused, she looks around the unfamiliar room with panic in her eyes. For a terrifying moment, Victoria thinks Sarah doesn't recognize them, doesn't remember where she is or how she got here. Then Sarah sees elephant on the nightstand, and the panic recedes slightly. Miss Victoria? Mr. James? We're here, sweetheart, Victoria says, sitting on the other side of the bed. You're safe. You were having a bad dream. I was back in the fire, Sarah whispers. I couldn't find you. I couldn't find anyone. Victoria feels something break open in her chest, not the careful control she's maintained her whole life, but something deeper and more necessary. She gathers Sarah into her arms, and for the first time since this all began, she stops trying to solve the problem and just holds the child who needs holding. I'm not going anywhere, Victoria whispers into Sarah's hair. Neither is James. We're staying right here with you no matter what. Even if I have bad dreams every night? Sarah asks. Especially then, James says firmly. Heroes don't run away from bad dreams. They stick around and help fight them off. Sarah considers this, then nods with the serious acceptance children bring to promises they desperately need to believe. Okay, but can I sleep in the middle, in case the dreams come back? They spend the rest of the night in Sarah's bed, Victoria on one side, James on the other, Sarah curled between them like a small, precious barrier against the darkness. It's awkward and uncomfortable, and completely improper by any conventional standard. But when Sarah finally sleeps peacefully for the first time in weeks, Victoria understands something she's never learned in 60 years of careful planning. Sometimes the most important things you do are the ones that don't make sense to anyone else. In the morning, they call Dr. Rebecca Chen, a child trauma specialist recommended by Sarah's pediatrician. Dr. Chen listens to their story with the patient attention of someone who's guided many families through the aftermath of disaster. Sarah's reaction is completely normal, she assures them during their first consultation. Children who've experienced trauma often have delayed responses as their brains process what happened. The nightmares, the anxiety around fire drills, the regression, these are all part of the healing process, not signs that she's getting worse. How long will it take, Victoria asks, for her to feel safe again? Dr. Chen's smile is kind but realistic. Healing from trauma isn't linear and there's no timeline. Some children recover quickly, others carry the effects for years. The most important factor isn't how fast she heals, but how supported she feels during the process. Over the following weeks, they establish new routines built around Sarah's needs, rather than adult convenience. Therapy sessions twice a week, modified school schedules that avoid fire drills, bedtime rituals that include checking all the smoke detectors, reviewing the apartment's fire escape plan, and discussing what makes their home safe. James moves into the guest room permanently, not because Victoria asks him to, but because Sarah does. Heroes live together, she explains matter-of-factly, so they can help each other when scary things happen. The arrangement raises eyebrows among Victoria's social circle and business associates. Speculation swirls about the nature of her relationship with James, the propriety of their living situation, the wisdom of taking on a traumatized child with no experience. Victoria learns to ignore the whispers, but she can't ignore the way some of her oldest friends begin to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the messiness that's entered her previously pristine life. The breaking point comes 6 weeks after the fire at Victoria's annual charity gala. An event she'd forgotten was scheduled, something that would have been unthinkable before Sarah became the center of her universe. The gala is held at the Four Seasons, a glittering display of Philadelphia's social elite, raising money for various causes with the detached generosity of people who've never needed the services they fund. Victoria attends reluctantly, leaving Sarah with James for what should be a routine evening of schmoozing and check-writing. But halfway through the cocktail hour, her phone buzzes with a text from James. "Sarah asking for you. Small meltdown. Nothing urgent, but she wants to know when you're coming home." Victoria excuses herself from a conversation about tax-advantaged charitable giving and calls home. James's voice is calm but tired. "She's okay," he assures her. "Just got overwhelmed during bath time when the water made a sound like rain on windows. Reminded her of the night of the fire. She wants to make sure you're not stuck somewhere dangerous." "I'm coming home," Victoria says without hesitation. "Victoria, you don't need to—" "I'm coming home," she repeats. "She needs me there, so that's where I'm going to be." As Victoria heads toward the exit, she nearly collides with Margaret Ashford, the society matron who's been the unofficial queen of Philadelphia philanthropy for longer than Victoria has been alive. "Leaving so early?" Margaret asks, her tone carrying the polite disapproval that passes for conversation in their circles. "The auction hasn't even started." "Family emergency," Victoria says simply. Margaret's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rise slightly. Yes, your new project, the little girl from the fire." She says it like discussing an art acquisition that turned out to be more trouble than it was worth. "How is that working out?" Something in Margaret's tone, the subtle dismissal, the implication that Sarah is a temporary phase rather than a permanent commitment, ignites something dangerous in Victoria's chest. "She's not a project," Victoria says, her voice carrying the steel that usually emerges only in hostile business negotiations. "She's my daughter." It's the first time Victoria has used that word, and saying it aloud feels like crossing a bridge she can't uncross. Margaret's expression shifts from polite interest to something closer to concern. "Victoria, dear, surely you're not serious about this long-term arrangement. A child with that level of trauma from that background. It's admirable that you've helped temporarily, but she really should be with a family better equipped to handle her needs." "What kind of family would that be?" Victoria asks coolly. "Well, a traditional family. 2 parents with experience raising children. People who understand her circumstances." The coded language isn't lost on Victoria. People like James, Margaret means. Working-class people who understand poverty and loss and the kind of instability that produces orphans and trauma. Not people like Victoria who live in penthouses and write checks, but don't get their hands dirty with the messy reality of other people's pain. "Margaret," Victoria says, stepping closer, "let me be very clear about something. Sarah is not a charity case or a social experiment or a phase I'm going through. She is my family, and anyone who suggests otherwise will find themselves permanently disinvited from my life." Margaret's eyes widen slightly. In their social circle, threats are usually delivered with smiles and subtle exclusions, not direct confrontation. "I didn't mean to offend," Margaret says carefully. "I'm simply concerned about what's best for the child. Surely you can see that your lifestyle, your responsibilities—" "My responsibilities," Victoria interrupts, "are to the people who depend on me. Right now, that's a little girl who needs to know that the adults in her life don't disappear when things get difficult. So if you'll excuse me, I need to go home and read bedtime stories." Victoria leaves the gala without another word, drives home through the Philadelphia night, and arrives to find Sarah and James building a blanket fort in the living room. Sarah runs to her with relief and excitement, chattering about the fort's architectural features and asking if Victoria wants to hear the story James made up about brave elephants who save their friends from imaginary dangers. As they settle into the blanket fort with hot chocolate and picture books, Victoria realizes that this, sitting on cushions in her formal living room, wearing a designer gown while reading about adventures in Elephantland, is the most important work she's ever done. "Did you have fun at your fancy party?" Sarah asks sleepily. "Not as much fun as this," Victoria says honestly. That night, after Sarah falls asleep between them in the blanket fort they're too comfortable to dismantle, James and Victoria talk quietly about the future they're building together. "Margaret Ashford thinks I'm making a mistake," Victoria says. "She thinks Sarah would be better off with a traditional family." James is quiet for a long moment. "And what do you think?" Victoria looks at Sarah sleeping peacefully, with Elephant tucked under one arm and her hand resting trustingly on Victoria's wrist. 6 weeks ago, this child was a stranger. Now, the thought of anyone suggesting she belongs somewhere else feels like someone questioning whether Victoria's heart belongs in her chest. "I think," Victoria says slowly, "that Sarah gets to decide what kind of family she wants. And if she wants us, then we're the family she's supposed to have. Even if we don't know what we're doing half the time. Especially then," Victoria says, "because we're learning together. And that's what families do. They figure it out as they go." 3 months after the fire that brought them together, Victoria Sterling makes 2 phone calls that change everything. The first call is to her attorney. "I want to adopt Sarah," she says. "Full adoption, not just guardianship. And I want James listed as co-parent. Whatever paperwork that requires, whatever legal structures we need to create, make it happen." The second call is to her company's board of directors. "I'm restructuring my role," she announces. "I'll remain as chairman, but I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations. My priorities have changed, and I need flexibility to focus on my family." Both conversations generate significant pushback, complex negotiations, and raised eyebrows from people who've never understood that some decisions aren't made with spreadsheets and risk assessments. They're made with the heart in quiet moments when everything else falls away, except what matters most. But Victoria Sterling has built an empire by refusing to accept that difficult things are impossible. She applies that same determination to building a family, and slowly, steadily, the legal framework takes shape around the emotional reality they've already created. On a cold December morning, exactly 3 months after the fire, they stand in a family court judge's chambers, while Sarah, wearing a new red dress she picked out specifically for the occasion, promises to love Victoria and James forever, even when they're grumpy in the morning. The judge declares them officially and legally what they've been in practice for months, a family. That evening, they celebrate with pizza and ice cream in their blanket fort, which has become a permanent fixture in the living room, despite its complete incompatibility with Victoria's interior design aesthetic. "Are we going to live together forever?" Sarah asks, chocolate ice cream smearing her chin. If that's what you want, Victoria says. Sarah considers this seriously. What if I have bad dreams forever too? Then we'll fight them off forever too, James says simply. Good, Sarah says with satisfaction, because Elephant thinks this is the best family ever, and Elephant is very smart about families. Later, after Sarah has been tucked into her own bed, she's finally sleeping through the night in her own room. Though the doors stay open and the hallway light remains on, Victoria and James sit in their usual spots in the study, sharing wine and the comfortable silence of people who've learned to be quiet together. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that night? Victoria asks. James considers this. Sarah would have found her way to people who loved her, he says finally. Maybe not us, but someone. Children like her. They have a way of bringing out the best in people. What about us? Victoria asks. Would we have found our way to this kind of life some other way? James looks around the study, at the family photos now mixed in with Victoria's business awards, at Sarah's artwork taped to the expensive wallpaper, at the children's books stacked on tables that used to hold only financial magazines. I don't think so, he says honestly. I think we needed Sarah as much as she needed us. She taught us how to be a family. Through the windows of the penthouse apartment, Philadelphia spreads out below them in its winter coat. Lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Millions of people living their separate lives, most of them unaware that 3 floors above the city, 3 people who had no reason to love each other, have created something that will last long after the trauma that brought them together fades into memory. Victoria Sterling learns that the most important acquisition of her life wasn't a company or a building or a stock portfolio. It was the choice to love someone completely, imperfectly, and without condition, and to build a family not on the foundation of blood or tradition, but on the simple recognition that some people belong together, not because it makes sense, but because it makes them whole. In the end, heroes aren't just born from ashes. Sometimes they're born from the decision to keep showing up day after day for the people who need them most. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.